Okay, so welcome back. So what we'll be discussing today will be the fundamentals of React Native. So for the first one, we'll start with the JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript um, XML. So basically, JSX allows you to insert XML code within our JavaScript code. So as you can see now, we have here the XML, and XML represents our kind of like the layout of our application. So you'll see there that same as aton nga HTML, we can nest or insert an element within an element in our XML or HTML. So amo na siya no ang aton nga JSX, as long as ara siya within sa aton nga return, then it's fine, no? So this is where JSX can be found. And also you'll notice that we have the curly braces, which allows us to calculate or parse or interpolate an expression within our uh, XML code. So you'll notice there we can actually create a variable. Let's say cons. Let's say name equals to John, and we can actually insert this within our JSX code. So to do that, we'll have to use the curly brace, because if not, if we're just going to like this, no, we can just insert something like this or do that. Then you'll notice on our output, uh, instead of showing the value for our variable, it shows us the name of our variable, not the value. So for us to to display the value, then you'll have to put it inside the curly brace, so that the expression will be parsed. Then you see that this variable has been parsed. So we can insert multiple variable and even functions. So for example, let's create a function in JavaScript. So function, let's say show name. Then we can just return some value, let's say hello. So right now we'll be just using Snack for the purpose of demonstration. So right now we have created a new function, let's say show name. So instead of what I mean, we could also create or parse a function. So let's say show name. Then as you can see on the output or in the right side, the function has been parsed. So the next thing that we will discuss is about components. So components here are the building blocks of our React Native app. So you can use the existing components here. So view, the text are the basic components. So card, asset example is actually part of the other libraries. As you can see here, the asset example is found under our own local files. So it's under the components folder on this one. And if we open this, then okay, so somehow, okay, so there it is now. So when I open this, this is another components, but as you can see, it is customized. Okay, so these components contains several components and has its own function. So we will discuss later about custom components. So the other component is card, but it is found in a new or other library in the or what we call the React Native paper library. So of course we have here the basic components, the text, view, and then the style sheet. So if we're going to check the React Native component or the documentation for React Native, and under development, you'll see there the components, and all of these components are available within our React Native. And also, as you can see, we have here some Android specific and iOS specific components. So obviously these will only work on their native platform. Okay, so the basic one, the view, which is, so basically it's just a container for our component. So a container that supports layout with flexbox style and so on. So let's talk about the, like for example, the button. So the button has this syntax, and as you can see here in the manual, the required attribute or required properties are on press and title. So props is another fundamental of React Native. So it kind of acts just like an attribute, no, in HTML. So it adds a more information or behavior for our component. So let's try to add a button. So just after our text, let's add a button. For React Native, the standard for the naming, the component should have, the first letter should have uppercase. Okay, so this error, it says undefined, button is undefined. So that means it's not yet added in our library. So under our React-Native library, let's import the button here, and you'll see that you'll see a blue bar in our application. So that's obviously the button. So if you check our documentation, the default color for the Android is this one, but for the iOS it's kind of like a much darker blue, or darker than the Android color. So obviously we'll have to add the required properties, because under the web it doesn't give us an error, but if we're going to open it in Android, so not adding these properties under Android will give us an error like this one. So title prop of a button must be string. So we need to assign a title, say click me. There you go now. But so far the on press is it doesn't give us an error whether we did not add an on press. So but still, no? So you'll have to define on press, because that's what it says in the manual, and it might change in the future. So it might be a strict in the future, so let's add it by default. So on press. So on press is an event when the user taps or click on the button. So in our on press, it should assign a function or a blank function. So let's do an arrow key or an arrow function. There we go. So we have here the shorthand for the function. So in JavaScript, arrow function has this syntax. And the other one is the anonymous or lambda function. So the anonymous or lambda function looks like this. So you can use either the arrow function or the lambda function, or you could actually use an equal function. So let's try to do that. So let's try this. Let's see if it will give us an error. Okay, so far it's fine. So you could either use a normal function or arrow or lambda or anonymous. Since we'll be just using it as a default attribute, then we could just use the arrow function. Okay. So just miss the parenthesis. So that's how. So that's for the button. So let's say. So we'll just do the click event later now. So in our manual, we could explore some of the properties. No? So let's say disabled. So if we add this property, it will be automatically disabled. So if not added, then actually it's there. No, if not defined, it's already there. The property is already there, but the default value is false. That's why it's working. But we're going to add it. Let's say disabled. And as you can see, the button is not clickable. So if we're going to assign false, then obviously it will the button will start working again. So the other one is the color. So the color, we could either assign a name. Let's say little red, or we could do an RGB. Say 0, 0, 0. There we go. So RGB represents or a function that will represent a certain color. So it has 3 parameters, and you can assign 3 arguments. So the first argument is represented by the color red, that the middle or the second is blue, and the last green, and the last one is blue. So the lower the color, the lower the number or the value, the darker the color, and the higher the value, the lighter the color. So 0 is the lowest, and 255 is the highest. So assigning all to the maximum value will give us the color white. Okay. So the other value we can assign for the color or the color value is a hex value. So hex value should start with a number sign and should have 6 characters. So first 0, first 2 character is represented by red, The second two characters represented by green, and then the last or the third two characters is represented by blue. So giving them all zeros will give us all black. So the lowest value is the 0, and then the highest value is F. So yeah, so the hex value starts from 0 to 15, but the value 10 to 15 is represented by letters from A to F. So that's why we are having this value. Okay. So what else for the button? Okay, so I think that's most about it. So the rest are just accessibility. Like this, for example, text to display for blindness accessibility features. So maybe if let's say if our user has some what do you call that, issues with their with if they have this um, problem with their site, so maybe we could use this accessibility label. So the other one, we could do some image. So for the image, we have these types of image. So the first one is our local image. So as you can see here, this is our local image. But the second and third types of image is we have there the network image. So that means it's kind of like a URL or from another website, and the data image is a base64 encoded data. So like for example, if we're going to use network, or let's say puppy, and if we're going to open it in a new tab, so this is an example of a network image. So you'll see there that it has the HTTP protocol, and while so let's try to look for the data. Okay, not this one. Not this one. Or we could just data. Okay, so let's try. Okay, there you go. So this is an example of a data image. Okay, so as you can see, it's very long text. So data image are basically base64 data, which allows us to maintain the integrity of our data image. Since like for example, if we're going to move this from platform to platform or OS to OS, then there is a probability that the encoding doesn't match with our current encoding. So cases, or sometimes some of the data are lost because our encoding is not the same, no, into another platform. So as you can see, this is the whole image. This is the whole data for our image, and then you'll see that this data is an image, Let me increase the font. Yeah, so the data is an image, and the data type or the image type is JPEG. So these first characters are it tells us about our data, and the rest are just base 64 encoding. Okay, so let's try to add uh, a local image first. So in a local image, if we're going to add it, we will be using require. So let's add first our image. So let's save this and just type file. Downloads. So let's just rename this so we could easily okay, so let's add it in the asset. Okay, so import. Okay, so import, you can either browse, or that's the time you could drag the file there. So drag. Yeah. Okay, successfully imported. But as you can see, it added in our root directory. So let's drag this to the asset folder to organize it. And then under the assets, let's add an image. And then the property for the image is source, so that we could link this in our source of file. No? So we'll be using require, and inside our require, let's put that forward. So meaning we will be looking, so that forward means it's in the same directory. So that forward, then our folder assets slash there you go, puppy.jpg. Okay, so let's just we'll just gonna use the web so that it runs faster. Okay, so on this error, it means that we will have to import our image under the ReactNative. Okay, there you go. So as you can see, it give us the image. So for the local image, it automatically assign the width of and the height of the image. So if it's a local image, it automatically knows what's the dimension for the image. So there's no need for us to define it. But let's try to make it let's give it a lower dimensions. So width, okay, so that it doesn't so at least it looks presentable. Okay, so that's for the local image. So let's add a network image. Okay, this one. So for the network image, we'll of course still be using the image component, but on the source we will be assigning an object, and that object will have the property URI, and then the value is that is we're going to paste our text or the URL for our image. So you'll notice that unlike our local image, it doesn't show anything here. That is because we didn't assign the width and height. So always remember that in local and in data image, it says here that you will need to manually specify the dimension for your image. That is for the network and then the data image. So it doesn't know since it's not in our local folder. So to fix that, we'll just copy the style here where it assigns the width and height. Okay, so there you go. So the image has been added in our app or the network image. So next is the data image. So it's the same as in the network image. So we'll just have to copy our data. So take note, this will be a very long code. But as you can see, it displays our data image. So same for the network image. If we didn't define the width and height or the dimension, it will not show up in our application. Okay, so I put it back. So for now, let's just remove this since it's very long. Okay, so that is for the components and then the properties. So the properties helps our component to maybe perform or behave or support our component. So yeah, so the next one is our state. So for the state, so state help us in cases like if our data or is not defined. So what if we don't know what will be the value for a certain variable? So what if there is some changes in our application after it loaded? So right now these are our application only displays information after it loaded. So what if after that, what if someone click here? What if this information should be maintained? What if informations will be coming from our user? So those case, we don't know what will be those information or data that the user will be given. So in that case, you will be using state. So for us to use the state, so we'll be adding let's say react that use state. There you go. Since it was already defined here, so let's try to create it. So let's say cons to react that use state. Let's say 0. So let's say our state is, let's say we will be counting some numbers that will be triggered by our user. So let's name it as count. So the use state will be giving us an array, and in that array it has two elements. So actually the first element is what we call the getter. So the getter is it will be the one who will be giving us the value for our state, and then the second one will be the setter. So setter obviously is if you want to make changes for our getter, if you want to change the value for our getter, in our case the count, then we will be using this setter. So setter is a function. So setter, to properly name it, then we'll just have to add set and then append the name of our getter. So set count. So if our getter is name, so our setter should be set name, and so on. So that's how the naming standard for our use state. Okay, so we have assigned it in our the hook use state, and the default value is 0. So if we're going to display the value for our state, then we'll be using the getter. So in our case that will be count, and you'll see here that it displays the 0 value. So what if we're going to change the value for our count? So to do that, we'll be using the setter. So in our button here, let's change it. Remember, the setter is a function, so it will be like assigning this one. So it will be looking like this. So set name, and then what's the value for our state? Since it is a number, so it will be since we started with the value 0, then we'll be assigning a number. So let's say 200. So once we click it, it does nothing. Okay, so oh sorry, so it's not set name, it's set count. Okay, so let's do that again. Then you'll see here it's from 0, it's now 200, and then the value 200 will be remembered all throughout the life cycle of our application. So until we're going to close it, then that's the time the data will be destroyed or will be gone. So we could all actually increment this by reassigning the value for our count and then adding it with another one. So if we're going to click this, it will be incremented, or it will be added by 1. So we could add it by 20, or we could multiply it by 20. So it's always 0 since the initial value is 0. So if we're going to put it to 1, then as you can see, that's the time it will be counted. So that's how the state works. So this data will be remembered always in our application. So the next one would be the custom components. So as you can see here, we've already in our components here, we already created our custom components. So as you can see, each file should have an export default. So meaning this will be the function to be executed or called when the file is imported. So let's try creating our own component. So let's say student info, and let's make it, let's create a function that will be the default for this file. So export default function and then student info. And for our component, it should have a props or property. So our custom component should return something. So it should have this one, and our custom component should have, we can actually insert like elements, like for example like this. So this one, it's kind of like it acts as just as a wrapper, no? So we could do this as view, but we can actually use this as a shortcut. So let's say text say Chando, and let's say we could add an image here. So obviously it's giving us an error, so that means that we haven't yet imported our components here. So let's copy our components, the imports here at the top. So as you can see here, it's kind of like dark blue here. That means these components are not used. So maybe let's just remove these, and let's do URI. Okay, and let's add a button. So title equals view student info, and the on press, let's just put it empty for now. Okay, so this is now our component. So let's try to import it in our application. So let's import, and let's give it a name, student info from, and obviously it's found in our components folder, so tap forward. So and then let's just use what Expo suggested here, so this one. So now we can actually use our student info. So okay, so let's add it on top. So student info, and as you can see here, we have the button and then the button and then the text here. So maybe let's try to add a style for our so I take it back. So we're just gonna use view. So view, and let's add a style. So we'll be discussing more about styles later on. So for now, let's add border. Say 1. Border, no, sorry. Border width, there, say 1, and then maybe padding of 5. Okay, so padding is a space in between our view and then the content. But let's try to add a margin as well. So margin is a space outside, so let's say 5 as well. There you go. So it has this distance here, so it doesn't stick with our with the edges here. So that's for the margin. Okay, so we have successfully added our custom component, and we can actually reuse it as many as we want. Okay, so last thing is we need to improve it. Let's say for our name, let's have it dynamically change. So for us to do that, let's add a property equals to name. So let's say what call that, let's add a name. Let's say Kevin Roland, and names equals to name, and name is equals to Sanjeev. Okay, so what do we need next if we're going to extract this value? So going back to our custom component, as you can see here in the parameters, it has this props variable. So that is where we are going to extract the property called name. Okay, so in our custom components, instead of putting the static value, let's use the curly brace and then props dot name. There you go. As you can see, the dynamic names assigned for each custom component has been applied using the props parameter or variable. So this name, it can be anything. It can be XXX. So of course we have to change it here. Then it works. So it can be any identifier. But of course, to avoid confusion or to make it more readable or semantic, then let's use the props as an identifier. So we could make it let's improve it more. So in our image, instead of using an empty URI here, so let's just use props dot URI. So let's try to use an image here. Of course, this URI under our props variable should be added in our components property. So URI is equals to then this one, but as you can see, it doesn't show up yet because it is a network image. So we'll have to define the width and height. So style equals to width, height, let's say 150. There you go. So obviously we will have to add the URLs for our image as well. So let's just copy it, or copy another one. So URI, there you go. For Andres this shows up, and obviously we'll have to apply for each image. there. Okay, so obviously we have successfully created our custom components, and custom components are useful if we want to have our own obviously components where it doesn't where the common or the basic or what we already have doesn't give us what we need, so we can actually just create our custom components. And custom components are reusable, so all you need to do is just import it in another file. So that's it, no? So hopefully you have learned something and try to uh, practice and explore on some of our existing components, and maybe you could create your own component. So that's it. So thank you for watching.